I can't take it anymore. The past few weeks have been the hardest weeks of my life. All the stories, interviews, the hauntings, the strange things that keep happening. I just want a small break, a few days of not being stressed, not being agitated all the time. Every time I look at a dark place, I can just feel that something is watching me, staring at me, waiting for me. I had enough of it. I decided to stop following stories for a few weeks. I was done with interviewing people about their paranormal experiences. I was searching for something that wanted me to find it, and each step I got closer to it, I could feel it becoming more fulfilled. I don't even know what it is, let alone how it looks. I decided to just ignore it, for the time being. I deserved to find some rest, but being bound to my small student room, I just couldn't get it. All the time I'm being surrounded by 4 gray walls. Even my sleep cycle became shorter and shorter, nightmares that plagued me, seeing things move in the dark. It doesn't give a person a good night's rest. I grew so tired that eventually I just sat at the chair, staring in the distance while I almost kept falling asleep. I had to do something to keep my mind off, and the only thing I came up with was a thing I never thought doing. I went to a pub to drink my sorrows away. It was late in the evening when I arrived. I felt the cold air of autumn filling my lungs, a clear sign winter was almost upon us. I entered the pub, hearing the bell at the door rang notifying the barman someone came in. The first thing that I noticed was the smell of strong beer combined with the old rotting wood in the pub. It wasn't an ideal smell, but the longer you stayed the more one could get used to it. At least it was warm in there. Any longer staying in the cold and I would probably get sick. I looked around in the pub. I only saw 2 men sitting apart from each other. It seemed like they had invented drinking in a pub as they were looking at their empty glass with sorrow and despair. I walked to the barman, who was cleaning some of the glasses. It was a tall and strong man, who I believe had all his hardships already encountered during his lifetime and now looked like an unemotional and not caring man. I asked him for the strongest drink he had. He looked at me and went down under the bar grabbing an unlabeled bottle with a transparent liquid in it. He poured it into a glass and gave it to me. It smelled like it was pure alcohol. I went to one of the booths somewhere in the back of the pub and just looked at my drink. It felt like I was part of the 2 other men sitting in the same manner as I was. I sipped my drink, and immediately felt it burn my throat. I don't know what this drink was, but it was very, very strong. I sipped from my drink a few times, drinking my thoughts away, until out of nowhere a strange-looking man came sitting in front of me in the same booth as I was. I looked at the man with confused eyes. I didn't see this man before, nor did I see anyone come in the place or heard the bell ring. It looked like a young man, but also very old at the same time. His hair was gray, and he had the appearance of a strong but heavy man. He was wearing all white. It was just strange that I didn't notice such a noticeable man before. I looked at him, but he didn't look back, he just stared at his drink. For a moment I thought he was just copying me and the other 2 guys in the pub, not talking, just staring at your own despair. Then he suddenly looked up at me, and he raised his glass. "To life," he said in a very heavy Russian accent, "and all the fruits it can give us." I raised my glass as well and gave a smile to be polite. For a good few minutes, he just stared at me, not saying anything. I just looked down trying to ignore this man who for a strange reason came sitting next to me. He then took a big gulp of his strong drink, all the while keeping his eyes fixed at me. "Where you from?" he asked me. "From around," I told him. He nodded, still watching me with his cold eyes. "Where you from?" I asked him, still trying to be polite. "I was born in Russia, but I lived for a long time in Pripyat, Ukraine." I knew that name from somewhere. I once heard it or read it, but I couldn't really remember what it was. Was it nice there? He looked at me with dreaming eyes, as if he was thinking of a better time. It used to be nice, he said while wondering. It really felt like home. He took another big gulp from his drink while seeming to think about Pripyat. What's your name? I asked him, trying to keep the conversation alive with this strange man. My name is Yuri, very nice to meet you, he said with a smile. Nice to meet you to Yuri. My name is... No need to tell your name, young man. We just here having a good time, right? I looked at him and gave him a crooked smile. Yes. We then both started to stare at our drinks, not saying anything for a long while. What do you do for a living? I asked, breaking the silence between us. I worked for a long time in power plant, he stated happily, as if he was very proud of it. That's when I knew why Pripyat sounded so familiar. Wait. You didn't work in Chernobyl now, did you? He took another big gulp of his drink and looked me straight in the eye again. That's correct, I worked in Chernobyl. I was really surprised and confused. What in the world did someone like him doing here in a pub like this one talking to me? You're not kidding, right? I'm talking about the Chernobyl, I said, not believing him. I'm not kidding, my friend. There is only one Chernobyl I know of, and that where I worked. He grabbed something out of his white pocket, a very old card. He showed it to me, and there I saw that he really was an employer at Chernobyl. It isn't that I could read it, it was all written in Russian, but I could make up the word Chernobyl, and everything else seemed official. Why are you here? I asked him, surprised. Drinking my sorrows away like everybody else, he said in a very Russian way while giving a smile. I laughed and took another sip of my drink. What kind of work did you do in Chernobyl? I worked at the reactor panel. I had to overlook if everything in the reactors was stable. I looked at him. He saw that I wanted to ask him something very badly. He widened his eyes, making it clear I could ask the question. Were you there when it all happened? I asked, hesitant. Duh, he said quietly while taking another big gulp of his drink. It seemed to bother him a lot. I didn't know if I could ask him more about it, or just change the subject. I finally decided to change the subject out of respect for what he'd probably been through, but he started to come closer to me. I could smell his breath. It smelled almost like metal. There are only a few men in the world that know the true story about Chernobyl. What do you mean? I asked, intrigued and surprised. Chernobyl wasn't an accident. I couldn't believe my ears. What was he talking about? Chernobyl was an accident. It isn't like somebody purposely would blow up a nuclear reactor. Yuri saw the confusion on my face. It's true what I'm saying. Chernobyl was not an accident. Someone or something had purposely sabotaged the reactor so it would explode. How do you know that? I asked in wonder. Yuri looked at his glass and drank another big gulp out of it. It all started a few days before the disaster of Chernobyl, he said with wrinkles on his forehead. I woke up to another nightmare about something watching me at the end of my bed. It told me to run or die. It caused me to sweat like a pig in the furnace, and it made me very nervous. Luckily my wife could make me feel calm again. You had a wife? I asked, curious. Duh, he said in a very Russian way with eyes of happiness. I had the most beautiful wife in the world. She was the flame that lit my heart and gave me a purpose in life. She too had bad dreams about something watching her. She told me for days that she felt like something horrible was going to happen. Somewhere I believed her, but I thought she was exaggerating. He looked at me as he was getting closer again. When women say they have a bad feeling, you must believe them. They have a, what you call it? Sixth sense about those things. I laughed as he told me that, thinking he meant it as a joke, but he was dead serious. It's true, she knew something was wrong. Every time she saw my coworkers, they seemed worried, she said. And she was right too. One of my friends worked close with the chiefs of staff of the power plant. He told me they were concerned about something happening to reactor 4. They said things about it malfunctioning for no clear reason at all. The reactor became already unstable for a few times and they needed to stop it from happening again. Going on about a safety test of some sort. Why didn't they told anyone it was malfunctioning? Yuri took a big gulp of his drink, while I followed with a sip from my drink. Because Soviet Russia doesn't like to hear failures, only success. They wanted to keep their jobs, so they tried to fix it themselves, said Yuri while shaking his head. That's sad. Duh. Very sad. I took another sip of my drink and reached the bottom of my glass. I asked Yuri if he could wait to tell his story so that I could ask for another drink. I went to the barman and asked if he could give me another drink, this time with less alcohol in it. I think you had more than enough, he said a bit angry. He didn't want to serve me, and I had no idea why. I didn't feel drunk, a bit tipsy maybe, but not drunk. I went back to my booth where Yuri was waiting for me. No drink? He asked. No, the barman didn't want to serve me, I said disappointed. Don't worry, you don't need alcohol to have a fun night. I agreed and went back sitting in the booth, waiting eagerly for the rest of the story Yuri was about to tell me. Eventually I noticed, just like my beautiful wife, that something odd was happening in Pripyat and near the power plant, he started saying. People were on edge, as if something was haunting them, but nobody spoke about it. It was normal to keep your mouth shut, even though more and more people were victim to freaky accidents. Accident. Accidents. Many people were injured or missing. One night I heard someone scream their lungs out saying that it was following him. We never saw the man again. Did people help him? No, we all thought the KGB was behind these things, but in hindsight even those suckers didn't know what was happening. As if they would ever admit it. Yuri took another gulp of his drink. It seemed like the drink was never going to go empty. He drank so much, but he never went to the bar for a refill. Then April 25, 1986 happened. I remember that day as being the strangest of all days. I woke up in the evening with a strange and horrible nightmare. Darkness was following me, and when it engulfed me it just said goodbye. I couldn't think much about the nightmare, for I had to start preparing myself for the night shift at the power plant. To give me some rest before my hard work, I would always walk in the small park near my home. The scenery was beautiful, not like those ugly-looking gray concrete giants everybody lived in. I was almost done with my walk until I encountered the next strange thing. I saw Vdova. Vdova. It means widow lady. We called her Vdova because her husband had killed her 2 children and then ran away only to be found murdered somewhere in the forest. They said an animal had killed him, but the man was clearly being harmed by something much dangerous. Yuri raised his glass in honor. I did not know if it was for the man or for the thing that killed him. Vdova became mad after it all happened, never left her apartment and always had every light on, especially at night. But there she was, watching the trees with tears in her eyes. I asked her what the problem was, and she said she didn't want the leaves to become red. Yuri shook his head again. I thought she was being crazy again. It was spring, not autumn. The trees were all full of life, not dead. Still, Vdova had an impact on me. She knew something that was about to happen, and somewhere I knew it too. He took another big gulp of his bottomless drink. His skin started to look a little bit red, as if he had a rash or was allergic to something. After the walk, I went to the power plant. I was part of the night shift that started at 23:04, but it was protocol to be an hour early preparing yourself for the job. After preparations, I walked in the long and the lifeless hall of the power plant where I saw a man I had never seen before. It almost seemed as if he was hiding in the shadows, acting and being very suspicious. I walked up to him, asking what he was doing. Yuri started to trill as he was talking about his encounter. I looked the man in the face, and the only thing he could do was grin very sinister. His appearance was unnatural, his face seemed wrong, but I didn't know why. His eyes showed so much hate, as if he wanted to kill me right there. He didn't say anything to me. I looked at his name card, Admet it read. I knew right then and there it was a big problem. As I walked away hoping to find someone to report the man, he started to speak. His voice sounded as if Satan himself spoke to an enemy. It was awful, and the only thing he said was, "Goodbye." I could see the red veins in Yuri's eyes as he widened them while he spoke. It was the face of someone seeing a ghost. I asked a few people if they knew a man named Admet, said Yuri again, speaking with his heavy Russian accent, but nobody ever heard of that name. I wanted to inform the security of this man, but Dyatlov called me and demanded that I had to go to my station. I was already late, and he seemed very nervous for some reason. I told Dyatlov what happened, but he didn't care. He was too busy giving commands to everyone. It was strange to see Dyatlov in the control panel. He was one of the 3 senior managers of Chernobyl. They almost never showed up. I sat down next to Akhimov, who also looked very nervous and pale. He told me that Reactor 4 was acting strange, like someone had tampered with it. Wait, hold up. You were actually working when Chernobyl exploded? I asked in disbelief. Chernobyl didn't explode, it was only Reactor 4. But I was in Chernobyl when it happened, he said while drinking another big gulp of his drink. I watched him with my eyes wide open. I was talking to a man who survived Chernobyl while he was working there when the accident happened. Dyatlov was commanding us for hours on end. I could see the reactor acting stranger each minute that passed by. We needed the power to go higher again, but it didn't. We all knew something horrible would happen, and eventually it did. He looked me straight in the eye as he came closer, and I could smell his metal breath again. Reactor 4, a RBMK-type reactor, is made to create 3,200 megawatts of power. At the final stage it had an output of 30.000 megawatts. The whole thing was so unstable. I warned Dyatlov, but he wasn't experienced enough to know anything about it. Akhimov pushed the AZ-5 button to stop the reactor from working, and that's when I heard it, a tremendous explosion, as if we were being attacked by the Americans. Yuri said, almost yelling, but that wasn't the case. It was Reactor 4 who exploded. Dyatlov started commanding everyone around, blaming Akhimov for making this happen. He commanded me to go with a few other people in the room to see what the damage was. I could feel my heart sink into my shoes when he ordered me to do that. We all knew that it would mean dead for us if the reactor indeed had exploded. Wait, you didn't go to the reactor now, did you? I asked, suspicious. Something all of a sudden didn't feel right at all. Yuri's face became even more red, now looking as if he had burn marks. His hand showed signs of blisters and a small drip of blood came out of his nose. The first thing I noticed was the strong taste of metal, began Yuri, ignoring my question. My colleagues tasted it too. I could see on their faces that it wasn't a good sign. We walked through the long halls and going up a few stairs. It was clear there had been a big explosion destroying a large part of the building. Everywhere there lay debris, and it seemed like half the building was on fire. Still, me and my colleagues ventured forth to the reactor, though we all felt sick. Yuri, what's happening with your face? I asked, seeing that he turned redder than before and showed clear burn signs all over his body. His white clothes showed signs of red blood coming from his body. It was only 1 hall away, but the radiation was so much. Do you know that the neutrons coming of the uranium hit you like bullets at almost the speed of light? They kill your organs, your cells, they kill everything. How can you still be alive? We walked closer and closer to the reactor. We knew that the reactor was gone, and the core was exposed, but we had to see it to report it. My colleagues, my friends, my comrades, fell one by one as we got closer. The air around us got distorted because of the high levels of radiation. I knew I was dying right there, as my vision became blurrier and my legs couldn't hold me up anymore. That's when I saw something walk out of the reactor hole. That's when I saw Admet with a big grin on his face watching us die. He then started to walk towards me. It wasn't a human. Yuri said as now blood started dripping from his eyes. It was something out of hell, a being that was pure evil. He was now standing in front of me, smiling with his eyes full of hate. He almost touched me, but the lights went out for me, and I never saw daylight again. I looked in horror at Yuri. His face was almost melting off, his skin was gone, he looked awful. No words came out of my mouth, only a squeaking sound of fear. Yuri took his last big gulp of his drink, and then he grabbed my paws with his terribly burned hand. Take it from me, you cannot escape evil, it will always find you, he said as his Russian accent changed in something much sinister, all the while having a big grin on his face and his eyes full of hate looking at me.